Um, so good morning, honorable guests, esteemed colleagues that I have the privilege of sharing this panel with today, and all who are joining virtually. Before I begin, I really want to first thank the organizers of this conference for their dedication to the study of Afghanistan, to her people, culture, and history. This really is a labor of love, and I recognize that and I thank you. Um, I can never forget the first time that I smelt rogho-i, which literally translates into yellow oil from the Hazaragi dialect of Farsi Dari. It was a profound reconnection to intergenerational taste, feeling, and survival. It was late August 2018, and the sun was slowly bowing to the moon in Dar-e-Ajdar, translated into English as Dragon Valley, Bamyan. Some 7 kilometers away, the hollowed-out 6th century Buddhas, Salsal and Shamama, that were destroyed in an act of cultural genocide by the Taliban, were vanishing into Hazarajat's skyline, and I was completely lost. I couldn't see anything in the distance, but there was a calm in the village with only footsteps of sheep and their shepherds that could be heard. A burnt-like musk that rested in the air was guiding my feet. I was becoming increasingly agitated, unable to pinpoint where or how I knew this smell. Behind me was a woman, presumably in her late 50s, with 2 silver braids going down her back, tucked into a white cloth. A disappointment filled her face when she saw me, and she mumbled in Hazargi, "Hi, hi, another lost foreigner. What can we do with these people?" So naturally, I joined her and we walked towards the city center together. The closer we were getting, the unknown smell wrapped itself around us, and I turned to who I called Kholai at that time in an exacerbated tone and explained that the smell was intoxicating and asked if she knew what the aroma was. She gestured over to a cluster of homes in the distance with her shepherd's stick and said that a marriage procession had been taking place and that the smell of rogho-i had filled the village with each day of the celebration that had passed. It was from this moment that I had become curious with the ethnography of rogho-i, and over the 3.5 years that I lived in Kabul, Afghanistan, I was wrapped in this. While rogho-i is not solely made or consumed by Hazaras within Afghanistan, for Hazaras, rogho-i was a marker of a distinct relationship they shared with the government since the inception of the Afghan state. Rogho-i spanned far beyond a dietary staple within Hazara households. It was a commodity, a currency. It had built up and sustained a power pyramid of the Afghan state. It was used to settle feuds, and moreover, it became amongst several distinct products within Hazarajat that afforded a rise in literacy amongst Hazaras within contemporary Afghanistan. Each of these social and political dynamics I hope to go through with you folks today. In the brief time that I do have with you today, I hope to take you from my journey to Dar-e-Ajdar and Bamyan through to how rogho-i is made, how Hazaras have moved through history in Afghanistan marked by rogho-i, and the tradition of making rogho-i and how it's sustained over time. I think first and foremost, I should really begin that the aroma of rogho-i is an appetizer in itself. The process of making rogho-i can be compared to purified butter, or what some folks in the room might know as ghee. So this really consists first of retrieving milk from livestock such as cows or goats. That milk is then taken and brought to a boil, whereby it is poured into a pot, generally clay or metal. That pot is then wrapped up really tightly for a period of 24 hours and left in a warm location to ferment into yogurt. Once made into a yogurt, it is then put into a mashk. So before I move forward, let me explain what a mashk is. So a mashk is animal hide, generally from sheep, goat, or a deer hide that is thoroughly cleaned by being boiled and dyed into a brown color. So from here, and depending on what district in Hazarajat you go to, they take this mashk, and it's usually women that do the making of this process, or those within the district. They insert the yogurt through the neck of the mashk, and they measure equal amounts of water. The neck of the mashk is then tied up or sewn shut, depending on the local practice, and then it is hung on either 2 or 3 wooden stints. You'll have a woman on each side of the wooden stint for a period of 30 to 45 minutes, beating and hitting this mashk back and forth until butter is crystallized inside of that mesh. The woman who's generally standing on the side where the neck is, she'll poke in and slowly take out that butter. What is so amazing is that nothing is wasted in this process. The butter and also the water that remains, which is a whey-like consistency, is then used to make products such as krut, dough, but also women in districts of Hazara use it to wash their hair or use it as a hair strengthener. The real art of making rogho-i is taking that butter and then purifying it and melting it, but finding the right temperature so that it doesn't burn. Once you really purify and make the rogho-i, it is then poured into generally tin cups, and this would allow for preservation of the butter and oil. Given that refrigeration remains a continued struggle in Afghanistan, particularly in rural and remote areas, this was a much sought after technique. In outlining this, rogho-i spans far beyond a cooking staple amongst Hazaras. For the Hazaras, rogho-i had several key intersections with our identity and our survival throughout the establishment and formation of the Afghan state, which was established through empire, genocide, and colonization. I can still vividly recall my maternal grandmother recounting her mother's memories of returning to our ancestral district from an internment camp. Their homes were looted and swaths of lands were distributed to non-Hazaras, and what would become decades of crippling government-imposed taxes on Hazaras. Hazaras were taxed by the central government per each livestock they owned, often known as rogho-i. In my ancestral district, my maternal uncles recall having to collect 4 pounds of rogho-i for each milk-producing animal they owned. This was on top of a myriad of other state and local government taxes that were imposed on Hazaras. These taxes were a means of ensuring Hazaras lived in a perpetual state of poverty, crushing any economic viability for Hazara uprisings against the Afghan state. Lines of a poem popularized within the Hazara social imaginary read, "Sinem qarquq shuda tukhtukh mukana, hukmat dazmo talbe mal mukana." And very roughly translated, it says that my chest has become so dry and my throat is coughing, but the government has arrived to take its product from me. This alluded to a Hazara not having a drop of rogho-i to swallow to alleviate the dry throat and the cough because of the exuberant taxation of the Afghan state. Rogho-i became a currency in which Hazaras would pay these taxes to the government for 2 distinct reasons: geography and access to economy. Contemporary Hazarajat sees Hazaras living in the Central Highlands, which is a rugged, mountainous region, leaving Hazaras very little agricultural land. The mountains became integral for shepherding and the only source of food Hazaras could have access, both for consumption and for trade. Having livestock such as sheep and goats, and cows for this matter, that were making milk and wool producing items afforded Hazaras the means of making products such as rogho-i, dough, krut, gilim, namad, and pashambara. These were items that Hazaras would bring to market in Kabul in the spring. After the crippling socioeconomic toll Hazaras faced in the formation and subjugation of the Afghan state, their primary currency were these distinct items. It was their access to economy, but also how the government calculated how to tax Hazaras. And it's really here where I must turn to the comprehensive research of Mehdi Hakimi, who has rigorously mapped out the punitive taxation imposed on Hazaras by the Afghan state. In his piece, The Afghan State and the Hazara Genocide, he outlines, it was due to state taxation imposed on Hazaras that significant numbers of Hazaras were forced to abandon Afghanistan, seeking refuge in Pakistan and Iran. Those who lacked the means to leave the country were subjected to further punishment, such as slavery, plunder, and crippling taxes levied excessively on Hazaras. The taxes were crafted to make it prohibitively costly for Hazaras to sustain their livelihoods in Afghanistan. Failure to pay these exorbitant taxes had severe consequences. For example, pursuant to law under Abdurrahman Khan in 1894, cases of failure to pay all taxes due, the wife and children of the failing Hazara were sold as slaves. The Afghan government levied a plethora of crippling taxes on Hazaras, such as a nafs tax, which also required every Hazara person or nafs, whether adult or child, to pay a fixed amount per head annually. Moreover, the government also instituted the dupuli tax, which obliged every Hazara family to pay a specific annual amount. Abdurrahman Khan calculated policy legalized the enslavement of Hazaras and turned Hazarajat into a center for slave trade. Consequently, tens of thousands of Hazaras, particularly women and children, were bought and sold in domestic markets in Kabul, Kandahar, and much beyond the borders of Afghanistan. The considerable volume of trade in the Hazara human beings was reflected in part by the cheap price of slaves. A Hazara could be purchased for 2 seers, 14 kilograms, of wheat, barley, or corn. The slave trade was so lucrative that it was recognized as a legal source of income, prompting the government to introduce a special tax on the sale of slaves. The state-sanctioned policy of Hazara enslavement remained in effect until the reign of Amir Habibullah Khan, who ruled from 1901 to 1919. Rogho-i was amongst one of the primary taxation currencies extorted onto Hazaras by the Afghan state. It remained the status quo until the late 1940s, well into former monarch Zahir Shah's rule. The rogho-i or oil tax only ended after the uprising led by Ibrahim Khan, originally from Uruzgan province, which was ethnically cleansed of its indigenous Hazara population under the despotic rule of Abdurrahman Khan. He rose up to the government and demanded that Hazaras no longer pay crippling taxes simply for being Hazara, and demanded the end to the discriminatory practice, which saw mass support across Hazarajat. Throughout history, Hazaras would bring their products to market in Kabul, as I mentioned, in the springtime, but they would face many layers of discrimination and harassment, being taxed by the local police and local governance forces to pay bribes just to get their market to product. This consequently led to the creation of Shirkat Hazarajat, a modern compound founded by Kabul-based Hazaras, built adjacent to Kabul's iconic Mandawi market and comprised of 10 rooms. This was solely a safe space for Hazaras from Hazarajat to come and sell their products without the fear of harassment from local authorities, exorbitant bribes, and also further taxation. To this day, rogho-i is made in the same fashion across Hazarajat. While many throughout Afghanistan make rogho-i, when you go to Kabul's markets, it is the rogho-i and different dairy products made in Hazarajat that are most sought after by consumers. Connoisseurs of rogho-i will go into further quest to source specific variations of the purified butter, some known as ghee or rogho-i. Rogho-i amongst Hazaras remains a firm reminder of how we have moved through history in Afghanistan. It remains a key commodity in rural and purposefully underdeveloped Hazara districts, where it is the main source of income for households. Rogho-i is both how the cycle of poverty was perpetuated onto Hazaras, but also how Hazaras broke out of the cycle of poverty. By ensuring that by entering the economy through the sale of rogho-i, khrud, pasham, namad, and glims, and using that currency as agency to send their kids to school, accessing higher education to break cycles of exclusion and strife. Rogho-i continues to be a social marker in Hazara communities. And I want to leave you folks with this. The burning aroma of the purified rogho-i sits in the air, signifying moments of happiness, celebration, grief, and or of coming together to settle feuds and making amends. While not exclusively Hazara, rogho-i has a significant role within the Hazara social, political, and economic fabric. Thank you so much.